Thank you, Eno and Laura and Rima for that focus. Um, was hoping to share a little bit about some of the things I've been learning this week and next week. But I was reading a book and it talked about that you could call it God or the universe or whatever you want will continue to teach you or bring to you the same lesson until you learn it. And it made me think of a kid standing at a board, no offense to our math teacher friends, doing math until they get it. I've been that person, and the challenges over the last year, I think, are teaching me about some things that maybe I was clinging to that maybe I should be free of or free from, and some other things that I need to cling tightly to. Just beating it into my head over and over and over again. And I suspect that our difficult times over the last several years have maybe taught you some things. And much like Wendy Eno, I wanted to make some time to share, maybe not necessarily about what we are free from or for, but what's something that you are learning lately? Well, thank you all for sharing. You may remember from last week that I'm looking at kind of the cross as an image of what it is to follow Jesus and how we live that out, how we love every day. And the verse that kind of inspires or encapsulates what I wanted to talk about today is this verse from John chapter 20. It's Jesus talking to Peter. Peter just makes an offhand question about, well, what about this other guy that's following you? And Jesus kind of snaps back and says, basically, in the Steve translation, mind your own business, you follow me. And that verse has always resonated with me because I think I tend to look at other people and think, well, they should probably be living life differently, when really what I need to do is mind my own business and be about my desire just to follow Jesus. And so the idea that I wanted to talk about today about living out love every day is one of growing, and talk about what that means and maybe give it a little bit more concrete detail. The first idea that I have become impressed about is to appreciate your own growth. One of the impactful episodes of my early life in junior high was I remember sitting in class and there were some of my classmates, keep in mind we were all in junior high, some of my classmates were making fun of a girl that was sitting one row over. And I've gone back to that situation over and over in my mind and thought about how I wish I had responded differently. I wish I had stood up for the girl. I wish I had at least taken made an effort to befriend her, to let her know she wasn't alone. And it's really easy for us to look back on periods of our lives and be ashamed or embarrassed or think, how could I have done that or not done that? I wish I had done things differently. And this verse in 1 Corinthians, a little bit before the part where that Laura referenced, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11, in this epic chapter on love, says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I gave up childish ways. And it is meaningful to me that this verse is housed in a chapter on what it means to love, that we will do this imperfectly or immaturely, you could say. For most of our lives, we will be learning and changing and growing in what it means to live out love every day. That the efforts we made in the past, I think the worst thing we can say about them was they were childish, and now I know more. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because we are growing in love. That's my personal ultimate goal. I want to look back in my life and think I didn't love the way I would love now. I would love I would love more completely, more wholly now. And so a way that we can live out this idea of looking back at our past is to accept our past as evidence of growth. It's a very rare instance that a human adult will look back on a time when they were a baby and think, I'm so embarrassed that I used to crawl around and drink out of a bottle. It's so embarrassing. How could I have done that? But we often do that with our spiritual lives, with our emotional and spiritual maturity. We look back and think, how could I have done that? Well, we were kids, we were babies, we were teenagers, we were infants. And it's a very good thing that we are in a different place now than what we were back then. And so I think as a means of living out love for ourselves, we can accept our past as evidence of our growth. We can appreciate our own growth and expect more of it in the future. And that leads me to the second idea that I've become impressed of. It's to expect change and growth. If you're like me, you may at one time have identified as a perfectionist, or maybe now you identify as a recovering perfectionist, whatever it is. But for oftentimes for points in our lives, especially our religious lives, we think, okay, I have these rules, I'm going to follow these rules and everything will be fine and good. Like if I just do all these things, then I'll be safe, then God will love me, fill in the blank with whatever you think. But it often comes down to we have a system or a set of beliefs or a set of practices that we almost will defend, even if it means sacrificing love. We have our set of stones and we want to keep them safe. In Philippians chapter 3, verses 12 and 14, it says this, and just cutting out some bits to get it all on one slide. This is Paul, not that I have already obtained this or am already perfect, but I press on to make it my own. I do not consider that I have made it my own, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal. Paul here is recognizing, now keep in mind, he had it all together. He was a religious leader. He was honored and respected. And he recognizes here that he doesn't have it all together. He, even in his state of religious authority, of having all his ducks in a row, there was more to be learned. There was change and growth on the horizon, and that was what he was pursuing. In our culture, we don't have many positive images of what it means to be mature. We often think old people are irrelevant, that if I get gray hair or wrinkles, then how could I possibly be happier than I am when I'm young and immature, right? But spiritually, that's not the image at all. I don't think it should be physically either. Maturity is a goal that we can strive for. It's something that we can look forward to. Change and growth is something that living things do. We change, we grow, we are refined like a fine wine. We get better with age. And so the way that we can live this out, this love kind of ourselves, is to welcome maturity in ourself, in our faith, and even in our beliefs. It is my hope that I can look back to the me of 5 or 10 years ago and think, how could I have believed or practiced such things? Kind of like looking back at being an infant and saying, how could I have crawled or drank out of a bottle? It's my hope that in 10 years from now, I will recognize how immature I am right now, even though I think I'm on a good path and growing and changing. I hope that I continue to change and grow and develop in my walk with God. I hope that 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road, I am that much more on the path to living out love in a way that Jesus did, in a way that I want to emulate. We can expect change and growth as we continue to follow Jesus. And third, going back to that verse of Jesus talking to Peter, we can mind our own self. I was getting my haircut this week. Thank you for noticing. I also think it looks really good. And I was talking with the person cutting my hair, and I go to sports clips where they always have sports on, and I said, "Do you get sick of watching sports?" It was a poker game, which I didn't know poker was sports, but it is. Um, and she said, "I don't. I just tune it out. I don't even pay attention anymore." And I was like, "Yeah, that's why I don't watch the news either. It's mostly because it's a lot of yelling and excitement over stuff that is just a game or something we don't need to be accusing each other over." And I related to my stylist because there seems to be a lot of anger and excitement um, when really that's not what we want to be about. Um, in John chapter 15, verse 5, Jesus gives us this metaphor of vines and branches. And Jesus says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in them, it is them that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing." And it strikes me about this verse that our responsibility is to remain connected to the vine. We're not supposed to be pointing fingers at other vines or other branches, rather, saying they're not bearing enough fruit or the right kind of fruit or they're facing the wrong direction. We are to remain connected to the vine. That's pretty much it. And that made me think of kind of the current state of our society, whether it be politics or sports or whatever arena. There seems to be a lot of finger pointing, a lot of these people should be doing differently or better or what have you, when what we as followers of Jesus are called to do is to deal with what we can, which is basically to mind your own business. You be about the business of following Jesus. We can approach any situation, and instead of talking about how the other person is inadequate or wrong or whatever, we can say, how can I live out love in this situation? What does it mean for me to love the person in front of me, regardless of their behavior or their actions or their political alignment or their sports team? How can I love this person? We very much are called to deal with what we can, which is kind of minding our own business. We can mind our own self and allow the vine to mind others. So these, for me at least, are three ways that I live out love for myself: to accept your past as evidence of growth, to welcome maturing in yourself, your faith, and your beliefs, and to deal with what you can, which is a nice way of saying mind your own business. Last week I talked about how I think the idea of thanking is a way we can live out our relationship with God, that can really be the primary stance of our approach to God, to not worrying about if God loves me or not. We know that God does. And what my mom was talking about earlier, our sin is completely covered. We are in a right relationship with God. And so our approach to God can be one of gratitude. It can be one of thanking God for each and every situation that we're in, at least for the love that God has for us, but probably for many more things, because we're extraordinarily loved and blessed. But in thinking about the bottom part of the cross, the larger portion, I kind of relate that bottom part of the cross to how we love ourselves, which is maybe the hidden third greatest commandment. We're told love your neighbor as yourself. That implies that we love ourselves. And so I think that bottom part of the cross kind of represents our own growth. It represents Jesus saying to Peter, "You follow me, don't worry about these other people." And that coincidentally is the largest part of the cross. It's pretty simple. Our relationship with God can be one of gratitude, but our relationships with ourselves very much is one of growth, of minding our own business, of living the way of love in our own lives. In talking about these ideas with Rima, I think she would maybe put the idea of wellness, of encouraging growth in ourselves and also in other people, to mind our own business, to live out the way of love. It's fundamentally one of growth, of change, in looking back on our past and thinking, wow, I've matured since then, and looking forward to our future with a sense of amazement of how much we're going to grow over the coming years in this way of love. That idea fills me with hope, Not that we're entirely self-focused, but we just mind the business of following Jesus in the path of love. So may you make peace with your past and not bear shame. May you welcome the maturing and changing of your relationship with God. May you mind your branchiness and trust the vine. And may we practice and encourage the wellness that love brings.